how did you come to be involved with this series? And were you hoping to play a very radically kind of different character in this first major role after transplant?
I wasn't. So to answer the second part first, yes, I was hoping to play something dramatically different, but I had no idea that this would be that. Robert Boudreau, who directed all of The Borderline, I worked with him several years ago on a project called Delia's Gone, and he called me up and said that, hey, I'm working on a project. I think you would be a very interesting casting in this very typical small town, two friends growing up on either side of the law thing, and I think you would throw a wrench in the in how normal this story is. So would you be interested? And I read it and I thought it was great. Um, there wasn't this burden of like carrying an entire population or an entire diaspora. It was just like you need to play the story of a flawed man, and by my very casting, he does become a person of color. He is a member of that diaspora without having to be so blatantly obvious or spoon feeding the audience for it. So that was it was a great treat to be considered for it just on the merits of my acting, and then to be able to fold in parts of my culture or my background as a result of just my casting was cool.
No, absolutely. That was actually something I was going to ask about because we don't often get to see South Asian characters and Muslim actors in these kind of spaces playing
Mhm.
characters that are so nuanced and innovative. And so
Yeah.
something else that I find really interesting about Tommy is that he's kind of a subversion of the wild card. There's almost like this controlled chaos to him. And I'm wondering what kind of conversations were you had with yourself and the creative team of shaping this character because he's almost like an enigma in this big story.
One of the beautiful things about it, there wasn't much conversation had. It was, um, I think everybody agreed that we were ready to take a big swing, and um, leading up to it, I was like, I don't really know if there's anything particular you want. I have an idea of me wanting to play someone who's a little bit removed from the danger of it all. Like he doesn't ever feel like he's in danger because he kind of just ignores it in a way. There's terrible things happening and he kind of ignores it. And the only really preparation, the only real preparation that I did for it was enacting. There's an acting method where you do the embodiment of an animal, and I chose raccoon because he's just sort of this like Toronto survivalist, and the wardrobe reflected that. I relayed that to Casey Jane, who was our wardrobe supervisor, and I was just like, hey, listen, I'm going for raccoon for this. I don't know what that does for you, but in a way that raccoons are just scrappy. They exist in chaos, and you look at them and they don't look like they can be dangerous. And if left alone, they're actually kind of adorable. But when you get into it with them, they're not afraid to strike back. And I thought that was really that embodied Tommy's personality really well, and that's kind of how I went about it. Cute and cuddly from the outside, and dangerous and survivalist if you get too close.
I love hearing little performance details like that and stuff that goes on behind the scenes. That's part of the reason why I do it, getting to hear anecdotes like that. Like you never think that a raccoon would be such a big influence, but I love that.
And
Uh,
it's like Toronto's national animal, right, or whatever. Or
Might as well be, yeah. And the relationship between Tommy and Henry, it's pretty central to the show's whole dynamic. And we get glimpses of their past through flashbacks, but in large part, their complicated relationship kind of speaks through itself through the initial interactions.
Mhm.
And it's very archetypal, but with a lot of nuance. So I'm wondering how much backstory were yourself and Stephen Amell privy to when taking on the part initially? And how did that inform your backstory work with performance?
Arjun, you're killing this, by the way. These are
Thank you.
great questions. Thank you so much.
Appreciate it.
I had read the good thing about it is because it's a limited series. All the episodes had to be written beforehand, so we all went into it, and because we were block shooting, um, we we knew everything. And the only adjustment that we had to make from from the written aspect, because I'm a Desi, and it is kind of strange. It's that in this small, largely white town that there's just this random brown guy in there. So they, it was one quick dialogue change, and it was great when they were doing a backstory on Tommy and his crimes. They just mentioned that he landed through the Hawley family, or he landed in the Hawley family through the foster system. That covered everything. We didn't have to ever talk about it again, but it immediately established him as an outsider trying to find his own place, and that, you know, as an immigrant, you don't really have to stretch too far to find a common ground there. There is this chip on Tommy's shoulder that he has as a result of working just as hard and getting in more trouble or having to prove yourself despite really doing what everybody else is doing. But even Charlie, Christopher Hydar's character, who's in, he plays Stephen Amell's father-in-law. He even refers to Tommy as a special case. And there's, if there was anybody else cast, it would be one thing. But if it was me cast as Tommy, being a special case really means something. And there was this added feeling to everything. Like, why didn't Tommy fit in as much? And there was not only his behavioral issues, but there's the very real fact that he looked different from everybody else. I got to talk to Lucian, who plays younger Tommy, and got to see his performance a bit. And we watched each other and just picked up a couple things here and there. It was, the beautiful thing is we filmed the ending on day 2. So
Mm.
what everybody sees there was day 2, and then on day 1 it was like the first scene that I had where I was conscious. So we've had the bookends of the entire performance on the first 2 days. So the rest of it, in terms of how that informed my performance, was really, all right, you can go big, but if you go big, you have to go big right in the middle, and you have to find a way, because it ends on a, well, I don't want to say anything, but it ends in a very particular way, and I had to find my way back home. So, if it's here and here, I can do this so long as it makes sense. I can't end here and then all of a sudden in the next scene it's here.
And one of my favorite scenes with Tommy is in episode 4 when he encounters Miles near the motel and they have a conversation about the comic book. And it's like it's an expositional scene, but it doesn't feel that way because it's so strange. It's so
Mhm.
kind of kismet, and the performances are so great. And there's a quote that Tommy has when he's talking about the message of the comic book. He says, "It shows you what's worth fighting for and what we can walk away from." So I'm wondering, like, was there any sort of creative choice or quirk with Tommy that you really fought to get in there?
The little brother in me, I'm the youngest of four, and cool older brother and all of that, just wanting your whole life to just be accepted by the cool kids. And I think a lot of that was, you work with somebody who's inherently cool, as Stephen Amell is. You want to be his friend, and because we didn't have a lot of time beforehand, and he's a very busy dude, so we didn't really get to socialize that much. He had maybe like 3 weeks of filming before he had to go back to LA and go shoot another project. There's a very limited amount of time, so like the most information that I could possibly have about any given character is my own experience, and trying to tie any of my own experience to that. So to constantly be looking for a friend's approval, or like an older brother's approval, in the way that I think Tommy looked to Henry, in just, you know, where does he belong in the grand scheme of all of this? And to be able to immediately connect with, Miles's character over something so silly, to be just like, okay, man, like here's something we share, we have in common. Tommy doesn't really go a lot of places where he has things in common with a lot of folk, or a lot of, normal people. I'm sure he has a lot in common with criminals and all of these things. And but this is somebody who took the time to get to know him, even though Miles is hesitant at first in that scene. It's funny you should bring that up, because Robert and Jeremy and I, we cite that as like our favorite scene of the series, because it is so, he shot it like an indie film. It was this beautiful night. It's this sort of, it's, you know the scene right before, and I guess if we're talking about it now in episode 4, the scene right before, we're getting ready to chop up a body in a bathtub, and the scene right after I break into their hotel room with, or in their motel room with a shotgun. So it's really this this anomaly of a scene where it's happening in so much chaos that even within that, it sort of sparks this wonderful friendship where somebody is where somebody is not only looking at Tommy as an equal, but he gets to share, his feelings about something because he's not on the run when it comes to Miles. He's just talking to another person. So I really like that because that scene is who Tommy is if he had better luck in life.
And it really shows, like you said, it is just like it's sandwiched between so much chaos, but it's such a great scene. I'll just leave with one final question. One thing that I really appreciate about the Borderline is it kind of feels unique in the modern Canadian TV landscape. It almost feels like a contemporary response to like the common British crime miniseries, like remote setting, tightly knit group of players. And I'm wondering, were there any sort of like thriller movies, series, or novels that you went to before hopping into the Borderline to get into thriller headspace?
No, absolutely not. It's the same. It's sort of the same response that I'm going to give when people were just like, you did Transplant. It was this medical drama. Did you watch any? And the thing is, I wouldn't want to taint it by trying to repeat somebody else's. Not that I don't find value in that. Is that so much of that, and it can be shown in what I will say is that the tone of the show from what the show actually is to even say you watch one of the early trailers of the show, they're quite different. So a lot of that is done through color grading and editing, that this deep sort of like moody feel and everything like that. But ultimately, if you're doing a performance as a person, it'll fit, and the editors get to make that decision on where they want it to land and everything. I was just constantly in search of the mistake. Like I was trying to figure out what would be the wrong thing to do in this moment, and I tried to do that as much as I could because I really think Tommy had poor decision making skills, and he was just making mistakes throughout all of it, and the only way to really get to that is me doing the wrong thing. So you know, we're having this very intense conversation about whether or not I'm going to survive, and I'm picking the crust off my sandwich. I think that was the bad decision, and I'm grateful. I've said this before, but I'm grateful that the cameras were rolling at that point because it just makes him this unserious character. And much in the field of these British thrillers, I love that you noticed that because I think with you know Shaftesbury and Graham and Robert, like we really intended this to be, and I hope audiences are catching on to that. It really kind of is this sort of middle brow, kind of silly, not very. It's not a show that takes itself very seriously, and not in a bad way, but in the sense that terrible things happen all the time, and they're not really that dramatic. And that's something that's very common in British thrillers, or you see something like Fargo or anything where it isn't as dramatized. Where I think a big question for a lot of us were, is that tone really going to hit with Canadian audiences? Because we're used to sort of, okay, cool. Is this a prestige, true detective style, cop thriller and everything? And the truth is, it just isn't, and that's not a bad thing. It's not. I don't think it was ever meant to be. I don't think anybody ever played it as such. I think it's a small town and terrible things happen, and in true Canadian small town fashion, people shrug it off and move on with their lives. And I think this is just a little capsule of a couple of people trying to move on with their lives and shrug off horrible things that are happening and crimes that they're committing, but it's all in order to just like get back to this. There's no grand scheme. It's just like, I'm just trying to get back. I'm just trying to survive here. I'm just trying to get back to being able to go for a drive and have a coffee and have an easy life. Like, I don't think anybody here is trying to be, other with the exception of Minnie Driver's character, who already is a kingpin, queen pin, I guess, in that drug world. People are either already established. There isn't this hustle on, it's not Narcos where somebody's trying to be the next, you know, bad things are happening and people are trying to move on with their lives. And I feel like I've ranted more than I should have. So
No, it's an amazing answer.
yeah, yeah.
That's all the time I've got for today. Hamza, thank you so much for taking the time to speak with me. I thoroughly enjoyed this conversation, and
As
all
did
the
I.
best with the finale of The Borderline. And
Yeah,
hopefully, I get to talk to you down the road. Have a great day.
100%. Take care.